Hi everybody, I'm Bill Sanders and this is Watch Art Sci. Today what I'd like to take a look at are what are called pilot watches. And we're going to be taking a look at them, but first I want to look at the Watch of the Week. This week we have an Audemars Piguet that Rudy Dobson was able to send a picture of, part of his collection that wasn't covered in the collection of his entire collection. It's called a Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Tourbillon Extra Thin Open Work, and it's got a rhodium tone dial open work, white gold applied hour markers, and Royal Oak hands with luminescent coating. 41 millimeters, and it's pretty thin, 8.95 millimeters, with all of that that's in it. And you can see the works in there, and it's a tourbillon. They're pretty dear. This one runs about 175,000 pounds, and it was a limited edition to 100. But that's quite an interesting watch for the Watch of the Week. Okay, let's start off with taking a look at pilot watches. And I'm really looking at the modern pilot watches, even though some we're going to be looking at have been influenced greatly by the past. And we're going to start off with two that I think is one of the one of the funnier and more interesting watch stories. And this involves Heuer watches, a Heuer 1550 Bundeswehr, and Sinn, which has a Sinn dialed Heuer 1550 Bundeswehr. Now, what happened was this: in the late 1940s, 1950s, during that period, Heuer had the contract to make watches for the German military. In particular, there was a German Air Force. And what they did, they figured, well, if Heuer gets a contract to make the watches, we'll give Sinn the contract to do the maintenance of the watches. I don't know who came up with that idea. But anyhow, so what Sinn started doing, because Sinn thought, well, we're doing all the maintenance, we ought to get some credit here. So what they did is that when a watch would come in for maintenance, it'd come back with the Sinn logo on it. This is why it's called the Sinn dialed Heuer 1550 Bundeswehr. The Heuer 1550 Bundeswehr, the original one, is a lot of collectors really like that. The same thing too with the one that's a Sinn dialed. The 3H below there refers to a type of luminescence that was used, and so that's why they have the 3H. But it's on both the one that Sinn put their logo on, as well as the original Heuer. Okay, so these are as pilot watches of sorts. Okay, let's take a look now at where we're getting into what happened, where they went with these. Now, Sinn, as well as Tag Heuer, when as organizations that TAG, and that's how come Heuer became Tag Heuer, and Sinn has a 356 Pilot UTC, and it's 1981, and it has Flagler on it, which is a German term for a flight watch, and it has the what are called syringe hands. They're fat and then they're little thin, little pointer at the end. And at 7 o'clock, you can see the GMT hand, or what they call the UTC hand. The Tag Heuer is another very clean looking one. It's got the what's often called the Batman dial, black and blue, and this is a bezel that you can You can turn the bezel on that for different kinds of operations that you might have. By the way, two of the things, one of the things that I consider, I used to be a pilot, and one of the things that was important is having a GMT time. And the GMT was called Zulu time. And Zulu time was what they used. So if you went to an airport in anywhere in Paris or in San Francisco, and they said, okay, your takeoff time is 2300 Zulu, it didn't matter where you were, that was the GMT time. Zulu was the term they used for GMT time or UTC time. So if you're a pilot, having one hand always pointing to your GMT time is really helpful, because then you're given, when you have your flight plan set up, you can check on your watch and see, okay, well, this is what my time is. Okay, so starting with the Sinn slapping their logos on Heuer Bundeswehr watches. They both have now the Heuer has become Tag Heuer, and Sinn is still Sinn. Their prices on both of these are fairly reasonable prices. They're neither one of them has an in-house movement. The Tag Heuer has a ETA, and probably Sinn has the same thing, or Solid or something like that. Anyway, but they're priced, or fairly well priced. Now this next one is one I really, really like. I don't fly anymore. I'm not going to be flying in the future that I can see. And if I were, this probably may not be the watch I would get, but it's a watch I really like. and I'll tell you why. It's called the Zenith Pilot Montre d'Aéronef Type 20 GMT. Okay. Now, why do I like this watch, and why is it looking like a pilot's watch? Well, the giant crown on there is that back in the old days, the pilots didn't have very good heating, and so they had to wear gloves, and they were all wrapped up trying to stay warm, because as your altitude goes up, your temperature goes down. And so if you're wearing gloves, having a great big crown like that, you can wind up the watch. Plus the great big numbers on there standing out in white against a black dial, you can really see them. And so this is probably, I would say, a pilot watch, just from the whole look of the thing, is one I like a great deal. At 10 o'clock, there's a pusher. What that pusher does on a Zenith, this runs on a Zenith Elite movement. It moves the GMT hand, which is that little one with the red end. The end of it is red. You can see that between the 7 and the 8. Now, this is my Zenith GMT, and it has a little pinhole up here, and you take a paper clip or something and push on it, and it moves the GMT hand around. I see where did it go. It's right up here at 12 o'clock. I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's the same concept. This watch has been a great watch. I'm a big Zenith fan. I don't, and most people think of Zenith as really good watches. They usually think of the El Primero. I like the Elite. It works just fine. Okay, let's take a look at this next set of watches. These are Rolexes. And one of the things about Rolex has two pilot watches, primarily the Air King and the Sky Dweller. Now, the Air King I like the Air King. I like the price on it, and I like the looks of it. I like that the green second hand. Now, this doesn't have GMT, and that would be something I think that's important for a real pilot's watch, but just sort of to have a cool one. Now this one has a 24-hour, uh, well, not 24-hour, but you can. It has, in addition, where you have the 9, 3, and 6, but you can also, it has numbers for the exact time, which is really nice too. Um, and in the lower right-hand corner, the Sky Dweller is a GMT. Now the problem with the Sky Dweller, and this is one of my favorite Rolexes. I have so many favorite Rolexes, none of which I own, but I like them anyway. This Sky Dweller GMT, it's Ever Rose 18 karat gold, and the thing is $39,995. In other words, it's a $40,000 watch, and it does have GMT. And if you have a lot of money and you want to buy a really good pilot's watch, this is a really good, very good watch for a pilot. They also have it in most Rolexes have the metal bracelet, but I like the leather one on this. I like leather and gold. Now, of these three, my favorite is the Explorer 2. Now, it just so happens the Explorer 2 with a polar dial is one of my favorite. I got way too many favorite watches, so, and these three, I like all three of them. And the Explorer 2 for $8,100 to me is the ideal Rolex pilot's watch for doing real piloting. First of all, it's one that I think most pilots could afford. And it's got a great big GMT hand. It stands out in orange against the white, so it's easy to see. And so this also, and it's in oyster steel. This was also the company called Bob's Watches. Bob recommended this as probably the ideal pilot's watch, which leads me to believe that maybe Bob's a pilot too. It's the kind of thing a pilot would look for, not pictures of airplanes and things like that. Well, I might. Okay, well, let's move on. Now, if there's the upper reaches of pilot watchery. By the way, too, I have on the Parmigiani Fleurier Tonda hemispheres. Now, mine is in stainless steel and not in 18 karat rose gold. The Calatrava Pilot Patek Philippe's watch. What a watch! That's a beautiful watch. It's a great pilot's watch, and I mean it's $47,000. So you have to be a pretty well-heeled pilot to get one of those. It was interesting when they first came out with this watch. There was a lot of Patek Philippe owners didn't like them. They didn't think that he should have anything as rough and tumble as a pilot's watch, but that's really some watch. The pushers on by 10 and 8 o'clock are for resetting the what the local time is. If you go to the Rolex site, they have a little video, and you can see how the pushers will move that. So if you're in one place, you're like, let's say you're an international pilot and you fly from New York to Australia, you might want to change your time zones. Now, the other one is the Parmigiani Tonda hemispheres. I can vouch for it because this is what I wore on an international trip recently, and what it has that to me is very interesting is that it has two small subdials that are black and white. The top is white, and it's got a little 12 there, and the bottom is black, and it has 24 on both of them. And what they do is that they show you whether you're in night or day, plus where you are in terms of 24 hours. And so after 12 o'clock noon, then you go into 1300 hours. And so this indicates the 24-hour timing of it. And also shows, so you don't get up in the morning and call someone, and if you look at that at the watch, you can see that it's still dark there. The top dial is what I call the home dial. This is like what your home base is, and then the dial that goes around the inside of the the hands that go inside of the inside dial, that gives you your current local time. Like here, it's 20 till 6, and then I have the top one set to GMT time, so it works very well as a GMT, and plus I can tell whether it's night or day. There it's night, here it's still day. So there are a couple other watches if you have lots of money and you're interested in something that can be used as a pilot's watch. That Patek Philippe watch, that Santa Claus can bring me that anytime he wants. I like that, and I like my Tonda Hemispheres too. Okay, now these next two watches we're coming back, what I'll call coming back to Earth. Two watches that I like: the Bremont Boeing Model 1 TI GMT and the Bell and Ross GMT. First of all, the Bremont Boeing is the Bremont is owned. It was started by a pilot, and so there are a lot of pilot elements and flying elements in Bremont. And notice how the crown is down at 4 o'clock. It was sort of slipped down to keep it out of the way as much as possible, so it doesn't stick out quite as far. And then you have the nice big yellow GMT hand on that, so it's easy to see. And the Bell and Ross, I tell you what, I love Bell and Ross watches. Neither Bremont or Bell and Ross have quite yet making their own movements. But what Bell and Ross has, it has a lot of watches styled after the avionics on a dashboard on an aircraft. And this one, this squarish one here, looks like what you'd see if you're looking at your stack as you're flying. And so they're sort of fun watches. I think most people who have divers are not divers, and I think most people who get pilot watches aren't pilots. But they might be desk pilots. Sit there and fly their flight simulator or something. And these two watches I think are really cool. One by Bremont by real pilots, and the other one has after aircraft dashes. Okay. Now, these two, the Breitling and Hamilton, Breitling likes to advertise itself as a pilot's favorite watch, and for all I know, they might be right. There may be more pilots with a Breitling than anything else. When I used to fly the FBO, which is a little shop that they have at airports, they call them FBOs for fixed-based operations. They always had Breitlings and Tag Heuer watches, and they seemed to be fighting it out for the pilots' money. Pilots are really easy to separate from their hard-earned money. Okay, so here we have two. Now the Breitling is this particular one is I sort of went to the lower price ones. And this one is a Navitimer 1 automatic 38 millimeters, and it's a very straightforward watch. You have the GMT with a little red arrow on the end, and then it goes around, has a blue dial. They have them in black and white and everything else, but I sort of like this one, and it has the date at 6 o'clock. When the time is 6 o'clock and the position there. Okay, so it's a legitimate pilot's watch, very clear. Now the Hamilton, I really like the Hamilton too. This is very well priced, $13.95, and it's got it has a 24-hour on the inside in red. And then it also has the 5, 10, and it has the actual numbers for the time, and then it has an outer rotating bezel on it. And it has the GMT time with a red arrow with a white arrow on top of it, so you can distinguish it from the inner dial, the 24-hour dial. So that it's called the khaki Pilot GMT. That's a pretty cool watch too, I think. Okay, let's go on. Uh, this final group of watches, this was sort of a catch-all of watches that are pilot watches, um, most of which are fairly reasonably priced. I don't think any of them make their own movements. And one I hadn't heard of before was the Zeno-Watch Pilot GMT, and a very nice looking watch. The Bulova Accutron Eagle Pilot, that is one of the best deals on it. That little, you got a little airplane character down there for the GMT. The Alpina Star Timer Pilot GMT is a very sort of a 70s looking with a cushion shaped case to it. That might appeal to some. The Ball Engineer Master 2 Pilot is another one. Great big old watch, very clear, with the and again it has the outer bezel on it as well. Okay, well these are some examples of pilot watches, and like a diver, you don't have to be a pilot, but they're sort of fun to have. And like I said, the one I liked the best was probably the one of the ones that's not the most practical, is that big old Zenith that looked like a lot of fun. All right, well, listen, I'd like to hear your opinions on it and what you think, and maybe any other ones that I missed somehow in looking at pilot watches. And so until Sunday, when we have our watch review, this is Bill Sanders for Watch Art Side, the art and science of watch collection.